Well, hello everybody, and welcome to today's call. I would love to show you how to do honey infusions. And before we get started, I just want to make sure that the audio is okay. Um, and yeah, it looks like it's all right. So could you let me know, Jean, if you can hear me okay? Just so that we can, before get going with everything. And I'm wondering, how many of you have done a honey infusion before? And if you have, then what have you done? Like, what have you been experimenting with? I'm very curious. So, okay. Oh, but it says lost you. So let's see if I'm back on. Yes. Okay. Everything is good. Awesome. So let's get going. In today's video, I would love to show you how to make honey infusions, and we're gonna be making a honey infusion that is either using dry ingredients, a lot of the stuff that you already have at home, or we can be using fresh infusions with some fresh herbs you might be having in your garden or in your, in your house growing. It's pretty easy to grow just by touching it. All right. So I am getting a message that I've got slow internet, which makes me wonder why. All right, so what we're gonna do is really, an infusion is a really simple process of putting whatever herbs, spices, berries, flowers you want to put, and whether you do it from a medicinal perspective because you want it to give you certain medicinal benefits, or whether you do it because you just want to have like a really great tasting addition to your tea, pancakes, or however you use honey on a daily basis, right? It's absolutely up to you. So one of my colleagues and someone who's now working with us, her name is Tyler, said to me, why don't you do something with like a typical, spices of the fall, since we are in fall right now. And I really like that a lot. So in my infusion today, what we're going to be using is cloves. We're going to be using star anise. We'll put some fennel in, which is, you can probably realize that all of those are very warming. We're going to put a little bit of cardamom in there. I'm just going to, let me zoom in to my spices. I might put in some nutmeg just because I love nutmeg. And to make it a little, well, ginger is such a classical one, so I've got some dried ginger here. We can use that, or we can use fresh one. And then, of course, cinnamon. How could you forget that, right? And then we're going to be using some turmeric. So we're going to infuse our honey with these dry spices first, herbs, and then we're going to show you how to make a fresh one. So, it really is as simple as, and I don't have a recipe for this yet. If you guys want, we can develop one for you. But at the end of the day, it really is about, improvising and kind of making it work for whatever pleases you and is a really fun favorite in your family. I personally love cloves. So one of the things you want to do is, there's certain spices you don't want to overdo with, and I will say cloves and cardamom are two that can really overtake everything else in an infusion. So you want to be generous but not overzealous with it. I like to break mine, but not to a point when you're making it into powder, because powder is going to be very difficult to filter, and effectively that becomes then a honey paste. And if you guys are interested, I can show you how to make a honey paste next week, where you're actually using honey and dried powdered herbs. Today we're just gonna be making an infusion. So the other thing I'm gonna put in is fennel. Again, I'm not, as you can see, let me do a little bit of a zoom in. So as you can see, this, I don't know how much you can see, but the cloves are still there intact. They're pretty much whole. The only thing I'm doing here is that I'm basically not crushing them to a point that become powdery, right? And then, I personally love fennel. I love that licoricey taste to fennel. So I'm going to use probably about 2 tablespoons of fennel. And again, what we want to do is just slightly crush it. And you can see it in your pestle mortar, or you can use also just a regular coffee grinder. Just make sure that you don't grind it too much. You just basically only kind of like, zest it, right? Not zest it, but like you just like do like a zip, right? And that's about it. So we're gonna do, that's our dry fennel. The other thing I love fennel for, it's a wonderful digestive aid. So if you want to have like a little bit of honey after dinner. That's just a really wonderful addition as well. The next thing is I'm using is cardamom. I'm using the seeds inside. You can use a full cardamom, but make sure you crush it, because cardamom is definitely is the seeds that have all the incredible flavor, right? And you know, actually, I'm not even gonna crush it because they're already so flavorful, cardamom seeds, that there's no even need for that. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is let's do nutmeg. Do you guys like nutmeg? Who here uses? How do you use your nutmeg? In my cookbook, Cooking for Hormone Balance, one of the things that I use nutmeg for is it's in our applesauce, and then when you do a pancake, or rather a crepe that's egg-free, I'm just gonna crush it slightly, and I'm using a whole head just because I love nutmeg. All right, the other thing we definitely want to use is ginger. So in this case here, I'm using dried ginger. You can also use fresh ginger. It's slightly easier to work with dried herbs just because they wouldn't, and I'm going to talk about that, honey won't spill that way. So, you know, I am not the biggest fan of dried ginger, so I'm just going to put a tiny bit of it. Okay. And mind you also, I don't know if many of you realize that dried ginger and fresh ginger taste very different. So I love, you know, fresh ginger, but I'm not a big fan of the dried one. So that's why I'm being a little bit conservative. The other thing that we want to do is star anise. Don't you just love it? Like how star anise looks? It's just like it's got these beautiful stars, right? Again, we don't really need to crush it per se in the mortar, and we can just break it up a little bit. Let me just make sure that you can see on the camera. And we just want to crush that. Oh, yes, please. And I'm putting about 3 florets in there. Okay. Then what we're gonna do is, so we took ginger out, so let me just put that on the side here so we know. The next thing is we'll do cinnamon. One of the cool thing about cinnamon that I love in this context here is that cinnamon is going to be a sugar balancer. So, you know, at the end of the day, honey is sugar. It is a lot of fructose, which is not my favorite form of sugar, but because of all the different other medicinal properties and how we can extract all the constituents from herbs, is actually makes it wonderful. Still wonderful, and it's all really about the amounts, you know, that matters, rather than just classifying it as sugar and then dismissing it, right? By the way, infusions have been used in folklore traditions for, you know, for centuries, and so this is like one of the big allies that we have in herbs. In case you've missed my previous Facebook lives or videos, I talk about cinnamon. I'm only using true cinnamon. As you can see, it's very easy to break. It's got these layers to it, right? Falls apart really easily. It's got this beautiful, gentle but sweet taste to it. The reason why I like using Ceylon, also known as Ceylon cinnamon, is because it contains far less coumarin, which is very in most places. So that was cinnamon. Let's put that aside. And the next thing I want to show you is I'm going to add some dried turmeric. Now, turmeric might be, you know, it's, yeah, I mean, it might be a full spice to some degree, but what I love about turmeric is the fact that it's hugely anti-inflammatory, brings a beautiful yellow color to your honey, right? Just looks absolutely spectacular. So what we're going to do is I'll use probably a tablespoon of turmeric. It does have a very distinct flavor, right? So you don't want to be using too much of turmeric, because otherwise it's going to definitely overtake your whole infusion. The next thing we want to do is use, I'm just using regular plain honey, right? Because we are infusing, so you don't want to have anything in that honey. And, you know, really important, buying it from local farmers, talking to your farmer, making sure that the farm is not surrounded by any GMO crops, that a farmer knows where the bees are going. There is no testing for the amount of pollutants and toxins in a honey right now. There's no regulations in the US. So you kind of have to just know your own terrain and where you're buying from. Obviously raw, we don't want to be buying honey from the little teddy bears that you squeeze out. That's not honey. that's most of the time is just sugar water. And so this is honey that I got on my last trip into Peonia, which is 4 hours away from here in Boulder, Colorado. It's a wonderful area that's surrounded by organic farms, and bees typically from where the beekeeper is travel between 3 to 5 miles around. So, you know, if you know your beekeeper and you know the surroundings, then you kind of can figure out whether, you know, how clean that terrain is, right? So what we're gonna do is, in terms of percentages, again, you know, I don't want you to get too hung up over these sort of things, because at the end of the day, the infusion is gonna happen no matter what. You can't screw this up, you know? It's not like in baking, making bread, where the flour makes a difference, how much it raises, and, you know, whether you use milk or not makes a difference. Not here. The worst case scenario will be, it's either gonna taste too strong, then you add a bit of honey, or it's just a bit weaker, and then you can make a stronger one next time. So in herbalism, we typically use about 1-to-1 ratio. So as you can see, there's, you know, a lot of these herbs are kind of, right, let me do a little zoom in on my hands. I could technically put a little bit more herbs in, so I don't have all that much, right? And so I would want to top it up with honey and then just do a second amount like that. So it's really as simple as pouring honey into your vessel right here, into your container. Now make sure, I forgot to mention that before we got started, make sure that when you get started, your jar is perfectly clean, is sterilized, and I don't mean by with antibacterial, you know, any bacterial stuff, but soaps, because these things really, you should throw those away. They are now declared very unhealthy. But it's more about really keeping it clean, as in put it in a dry washer, have your run it on high heat, and then you can put some hot water, you know, on top of that. Use regular soap. You don't need to use any antibacterial soap. And so as you can see, we just covered the herbs, and they're not fully. What I'm doing is because of the viscosity of the honey, we just want to make sure that all the herbs get their even exposure. So, all right, so that's mixed in really well, but then I'm going to be adding more honey to it. So let me do a little zoom in on my hands again. I'm wondering here, how many of you have made honey infusion before, and what have you been infusing? So in a second, when we finish this, I'm going to be talking about what do you then use, how do you then infuse it? And there's a couple of methods. The first method that we can use is definitely basically keeping it out in the sun, and that will take you about 5 days to infuse it. I personally like to keep it a little bit longer. You don't want to keep it for too long. 2 weeks is probably the maximum. All right, so there we have it. That's about a 1-to-1. And you know, if you have a place in your house that has got a nice sunny spot, I highly recommend to put it there, and basically time and the sun is gonna do the job. So you might add let me just add a tiny bit more honey into this, and actually, for the sake of time, I'm just gonna leave it the way it is. So the other little trick I want to share with you is that you definitely want to cover it, right, with something. I forgot to bring my lid. You want to cover it with a lid, only because you don't want to be attracting bees and flies and all that to be sitting on that, right? So that's going to basically be going on the counter, and give it 5 days, a little bit more, in a sunny place. That's one way of infusing your honey. The other way of infusing your honey is that you can basically do a little bit faster job and infuse it in a vessel, such as, for example, a slow cooker. So I've got an Instant Pot here, and I just turned on the slow cooker feature, and the heat went up way too fast. So before you do any experiments, make sure you test it, so that make sure that you basically don't boil the honey. The temperature you want to work with is the enzymes. Anything above 110 Fahrenheit is going to destroy the enzymes. I don't care so much about the enzymes in the honey. I want more of the constituents to go into the honey. So you can work between 130 to 150 Fahrenheit, and that's about 50 to 70 centigrade, I believe. So it's basically to the touch. When you are doing that kind of infusion, what you notice is that when you put your finger in the honey, and please be sure that the honey is not boiling. And you know when it's boiling, it starts bubbly, gets really bubbly and gets really liquidy. That's when you know it's way too hot and you really destroyed it. So you don't want to bring it to that point. You want to bring it to a point when you put your finger in the honey and it's really warm, but it's to your body, right? To touch, but you can still touch it. It's very nice and warm, but it's not hot. Okay, and that's the most that's the best temperature, if you will, to infuse it in. So the next thing I want to show you is how to make an infusion. So let me just go back to the Instant Pot. So I'm gonna pull out, for this video, I thought that the slow cooker in the Instant Pot can work, and I set it up to slow cooker and low, and within 40 minutes it was just steaming away and was boiling the water. So there's just no way I can use that. So I'm gonna go back to my crock pot and use that, because I've used that before for making infusions. So you basically have to test that and figure out what works best for you. The other way, you can obviously do it on a stove, right? So get basically a big pot, put some water in it, and then keep it on very low temperature, the lowest possible. Keep checking, either use your finger or use some kind of a thermometer. You also want to make sure that you're using jar that is not going to break. So I do recommend to use mason jars. Don't use, jars that you have saved from jams and stuff like that, because most of the time they can't withstand the heat of the water in case the water cooks too quickly. All right, so the next one I want to show you is actually my favorite. Oh, by the way, so before I forget, so you're keeping this on the counter 5 days, between 5 days to 2 weeks, and then after that you're going to be straining the honey using this a regular sieve. Is perfectly fine, but allow it time, because it's gonna need time to sit through and separate, right? So just be patient with that. It's not as quick as a liquid. So just really, and then once you infuse it with dried herbs, that honey can stand on the shelf for as long as a regular honey would, because you have not introduced any water in here. It's perfectly safe. It's a very different story when you do infusions with fresh herbs. So the herbs that I have here right now with me is basically, you have this beautiful sage, thyme, which is my absolute favorite, and rosemary. Now, that's a very classical Western herbalism, combo, right? Herbal combo. In fact, there are songs that are written about it: sage, rosemary, and thyme. And every one of them has got everything from antibacterial, it's just generally antimicrobial properties. Thyme is also known to stimulate the immune system. I always, when I touch thyme, whenever I smell it, I always think about my friend Yasmina Yakelstam, who's the founder of Healing Histamine. Some of you know, passed away last year. It was a big grieving moment for the whole community, and for me as well. She was one of my closest friends, and I always think about her when I touch thyme, because thyme can also bring down your histamine levels, which is something a lot of people don't know. So I have to say, thyme was never my favorite herb until I kind of grew on me, especially when I started hanging out with Yasmina. All right, so what we're gonna make in this jar here is basically an infusion using fresh herbs. You can use them just as they are, and again, the amounts you want to use is about 1 to 1. But it's like, for example, if you don't like sage, just don't use it. If you don't like thyme, just don't use it, right? I'm definitely I'm not gonna go too crazy with rosemary, just because rosemary, it's not my favorite. But it might be yours. And one of the amazing things about rosemary, let me share with you, during our school project, when I was going through School of Herbalism, we had a project where we had to be with an herb for a week, right? And there was a list of herbs that you can pick from. I didn't pick rosemary, but a lot of other people did, and later we shared in class. And people were saying how incredibly effective rosemary was on their brain function, and so really giving them focus and alertness. Some of them doing rosemary at night, like an infusion, ended up not sleeping, so that was not good. Too much rosemary could also cause anxiety, but in the right amounts, like the small therapeutic amounts that we're going to be using here in this honey, it can really be a great brain booster, which is so awesome, right? So now the reason why I brought up my pestle and mortar is because we want to bruise them just slightly in order to release the oils from the honey. Sorry, from the herb itself. Now you can use the stems as well. It doesn't really matter. And so just a tiny bit of, let me just remove things so it doesn't make so much that awful noise. Just very slight bruising, nothing too extensive. So if you want to just watch my hands, I'm gonna do that right here. I'm definitely gonna be generous with my thyme. Now fresh herbs are not gonna be as potent as dried herbs. So what we're gonna do is we want more of it in terms of the way it looks, and I'll show you in a second. Oof, I can't just tell you about the fragrance, how incredibly potent it smells. It just feels like medicine already. I'm gonna push it down because we want the honey to cover it fully. We don't want any herbs to be sticking out. All right, so that was thyme. I might put a little bit more thyme in. And, you know, really, if you have a family who falls sick all the time, I do highly recommend thyme. Just gentle bruising. Doesn't sound so gentle, does it, when I'm whacking it so hard. And then we have rosemary. Okay, so I might use just about 3 sprigs of rosemary. One big one, one small one. Like I said, it's not my favorite herb. Okay, oh, that definitely releases a lot of essential oils right there on the spot. Okay, so not every honey is liquid. The other honey, because I'm out of honey now, so I bought another honey that I've been keeping warm here, and it will soften as you put it in the on your winter tilt. So this is a good example of a honey that is not as soft, but that's okay. And what you can do in order to, I just didn't have the time to prepare for this. So what you can do is you can soften it by putting it in the hot water. Again, make sure that the water is not too hot, because then the jar is gonna break. That was part of the reason why I could not get ready on time, is because I needed more gentle time. I was just afraid that this jar that I'm using right now is not heat ready. So, okay. So this honey, as you can see, needs a little bit of mixing with the herbs, because it is one of those that is not super runny. It will become runny though as it gets warm. So that's the good news. But I just want to blend it in here, all the herbs, so that you guys can just see also the amount. I'm just curious about the amount that we're going to get out of this. So the straining process is going to be exactly the same for fresh herbs, and that's going to be, you're going to be basically putting this jar upside down, and you want to put it over a sieve and let that strain for like a good half an hour, 40 minutes, so you don't have any honey left on the herbs that you're going to be chucking away, right? All right, so I want to just show you, so there's a couple of herbs that's still sticking out. The best thing I've found, instead of pushing them in, is to just cover it with honey, even more honey. And the reason why we don't want them to stick out is because these fresh herbs contain water, and what's going to happen is water, as you may know, is will damage the can cause the honey to go moldy, right? And so we don't want a moldy. I have to do it, sorry. We don't want a moldy honey. So during the time of infusion, it's not a big deal. It becomes a deal later for preservation, right? So with this kind of honey, you can do a couple of things. Exactly the same thing. You can put it out on in a window in a sunny spot and infuse it for 5 days to 2 weeks, no problem at all. You can also put that into, give it a hot bath that I talked about earlier. You can do that, just make sure the water is not too hot, your vessel is ready to take some heat, And when you touch the honey, it's between 130 to 150 Fahrenheit, 50 to 70 centigrade, or the 50 to 60 centigrade. And then you just let it sit there for 5 hours. If you're doing a hot bath infusion, that's all you need, right? And then you strain it, and you have this incredible honey for your whole family. Also, a wonderful gift. One of the things that I'm gonna show you when spring comes is I'm gonna be showing you how to make infusions also with sprigs of like pine trees and things like that. It's not a season right now, so we'll do it when the season is right. Okay, so let's see. Jean, what questions do we have coming in? Darla is saying, and the smell of star anise is awesome. It really is. So I'm really looking forward to this infusion here. It doesn't look like there's a lot of honey in here, but actually we did put quite a bit. I might top it up a little bit more, just to have even more wonderful infused honey. I just didn't want to wait because this thing is kind of slow moving. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the simple presentation. I want to just, and appreciate how easy it is to infuse honey, something that you can use as a little add-on, a condiment in any of your daily food, a wonderful gift to someone, especially during this time of a season. And I think it just opens you up to so many opportunities of and creativity, if you will, of what you want to put in here. It's absolutely up to you. All right, have a lovely weekend, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.